Okay, good evening everyone. This is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today we're going to take a look at the third place finishing game in the 2007 Game of the Year contest for the U.S. Chess League. So this was actually the game that I picked for number one. I'm a tiny bit disappointed that it didn't win, and I suspect that probably the main reason why it didn't win, though third place is still a very, very nice finish, is that a good deal of it was opening preparation by the winner, Marcel Martinez. Nevertheless, I think that that's really a factor that shouldn't have weighed too much. So in my view, it was the cleanest, all-around, best-played game by the winner. It was of great theoretical significance, this game, and it's spectacular, well played, and Black played very well also. I mean, it's not really clear what Black did wrong in this game. So I think for all of these reasons, it really was a deserving would have been a deserving winner for the contest. But still, third isn't bad. And in any case, I'm sure you'll enjoy this game a great deal. So let's go ahead and begin. White is Marcel Martinez playing for the Miami team. Black is Martinez-Zilberstein playing for San Francisco. I'm not sure, but I think this was a playoff game, an early round of the playoffs. So that I think even enhances its status, though at least one of the two remaining games was also playoff games. So it doesn't really have that over it, but still, a great game. So here we go. E4, E5, Knight F3. We've got a Ruy Lopez here, and Black plays this Mahler or Neo-Mahler that Shirov and some Ukrainian players, I believe Onishuk was one of them, really started to make into a very, very serious and powerful system in the mid to late 90s. And Shirov is playing this again recently. Okay, so all of this is very well known, and I don't want to say too much about it because there's a great deal of theory here. I'll just make a few kind of programmatic comments about this line. So at this point, Black has sacrificed a pawn. However, he has very good pressure on White's center. So you can see that this D pawn is a bit vulnerable, especially if Black plays bishop to G4, which he in fact does on the very next move. Also, the E4 pawn is hanging too. So between the various threats to White's center, Black is probably going to regain the pawn or at least obtain very good play. Sometimes White keeps the pawn and, well, okay, so we'll see bishop to G4. And if I remember correctly, there are some lines where White keeps it. So, for example, rook to A4 overprotects the D4 pawn. Say rook to E8, rook E1. And here, remember, I think Black plays Queen D7 in this position. All right, so here you can see White's keeping the pawn, but Black gets pretty reasonable counterplay elsewhere. Another line, if I remember right, is involved with, or involves bishop to A4 instead. And here I think Black again plays D5 or bishop takes F3. And this is an example of a position where White accepts these doubled pawns on his king side to maintain the pawn on D4. Alright, so all of these are viable ways for White to proceed. In this game, Martinez decided again to keep the D4 pawn, but rather than accept these double pawns in front of his king, to give back the E4 pawn. Okay, so he played bishop to E3, knight takes E4. I'll take a couple more moves, then I'll make some more comments here. Alright, so it might not seem clear, initially at least, what really White has going for him here. So material's even. Black has this pretty nice looking knight on E4. And in fact, Black has a better pawn structure too, at least from a very academic point of view. I mean, White's got these two isolated pawns here, while Black's queenside pawns are together. So this would seem to be in White's favor as well. So what is it? Oh, sorry, in Black's favor. So what is it that White really has going for him here? Well, the main advantage that White has, and this is very traditional in this variation, is that Black has two minor pieces that tend to be out of play, and it's the bishop on B6 especially, but the knight on C6 as well. So these two minor pieces of Black's often pose serious problems down the road for him, in that they're just out of play in a fairly permanent way, especially this bishop on b6. So that's really a problem piece, and this has been a well-known idea for a long time. I recall in the Groningen FIDE knockout, the World Championship, the very first one. So that was the one where Anand won and then played Karpov in the final match in Lausanne later on. But along the way to winning at least the main portion of the event, Anand beat Shirov in this variation. I recall in that game that Shirov ended up with, again, his queenside minors just locked out of the game. And while material was, at least nominally speaking, equal, functionally speaking, White was just up and was able to decide the game by exploiting that fact. So what Black needs to do then is to make sure that these pieces can perform in some meaningful way. Alright, so continuing here, White plays knight to c3, endeavoring to eliminate Black's active knight on e4. Now, it seems that this position is a U.S. Chess League special, so I believe it's occurred 3 times and 3 times only. All 3 of these games, I think, are from U.S. Chess League matches. So the first one was a 2006 game between Becerra and Friedel, and this continued with the move f5. Alright, so this protects the pawn and also at least feints at some kind of general kingside expansion, though it doesn't end up happening. Alright, so the game continued with knight to d5, preventing any f4 ideas. Knight to a5, takes and takes. b4, knight to b7, and again you can see that Black's 2 queenside minor pieces are worth their weight in tissues or something, but not in anything valuable. Okay, White plays rook f to c1, king to h8. And of course White can't take on c7 because there will be a pin. But after this exchange and now d5, while Black has managed to have one of his poor minor pieces exchanged off, the cost is a weak b pawn and a terrible hole on c6. So White is in very, very good shape and went on to win with relative comfort. So just a few more moves here. And you can see there's just no comparison in the relative strength of the pieces. All of White's units are more active. Black's knight on e4 looks good, but it can be chased away at White's pleasure with f3. And meanwhile, White's rook dominates Black's. The knight on d4 can go to c6 or e6. And the dark-squared bishop, well, the only bishop on the board, can be developed usefully on b2, where it'll bear down on this long diagonal. But even on e3 or f4 could be well placed too. So White has every advantage in the position, and as I said, went on to win pretty comfortably. So going back to knight to c3, Friedel's f5 didn't really work out. So the second game, as I mentioned, this occurred in 3 U.S. Chess League games. At least I believe there were U.S. Chess League games. The second one saw the move knight to f6. And in fact, this is what happened in our game as well. Now, in fact, both of the 2 remaining games are between these same 2 players. So Marcel Martinez and Dmitry-Zilberstein had played this about a month before the game we're looking at now. And that game continued, both games continued with rook f to e1. So you can see the idea is to play bishop to g5, uncovering an attack on the queen, and threatening bishop takes f6. Of course, Black could play queen to d8 in response, but then knight to d5 would renew the threat. So Black really has to do something about this threat of bishop to g5, followed by knight to d5. Now, in the earlier game, Zilberstein played queen to d8, getting out of the way immediately. Martinez played queen to d2, h6, preventing the pin, but encouraging the sack, which in fact Martinez played. So bishop takes h6, g takes, queen takes, knight g4, and in the game, Martinez played queen to h5, and Zilberstein was able to escape with a draw after knight takes d4, knight to e4, looking very threatening, but Black had everything just under control. So d5 takes, knight f3, gf, queen d7, and after all of the blood here has been shed, Black is still up a piece, and White doesn't quite have time to bring a rook into play. So of course, if let's say this rook on a1 was already on a3, he could play queen to g5 check, followed by rook to h3 mate. but black has just enough time to keep everything shut. So white tried it, and now black played the simple interference move e3. White sacrificed the exchange, and he's threatening it again, but black has a clever little tactic. I should have asked you a few moves ago if you could see it, but better late than never. So if you can find what black played here, give it a try, and if you do, then excellent. Alright, so the move is rook to b3. The point is that if white plays rook takes b3, black plays queen to d1 check, takes on b3, and is simply, well, that'll still just force perpetual check. I mean, white still plays queen h5, g5. So, oops, let me fix something here. Alright. So queen h5 check happened, and the players just agree to a draw here before repeating 3 times. Alright, so this was a success for black in that he drew, but theoretically speaking it wasn't, because here, after that sacrifice, let's go back again. Rook f to e1 is where the games diverge. Thread is bishop to g5 followed by knight to d5. Queen d8 is the older game. Queen d2, h6, takes, knight g4. Okay, so here instead of queen to h5, which allowed knight takes d4 and black just saving the game, it seems that the move queen to d2 would have given white a serious advantage. Maybe not winning, but very good play. So the idea is just to play h3 and then return with the queen after the knight leaves and continue the attack. So just a quick example, king g7, play that, d5, and let's say we have this big exchange followed by rook takes e5, and here white has more than sufficient compensation for the material. Well, really he's not even down material technically, he has 3 pawns for the piece, but with black's king rather exposed, I mean, well, not only is it exposed, but black's defensive resources are a bit strained. I mean, white has almost all of his pieces pointing in that direction. Even the rook from a1 can get into the game quickly via the a4 square and head various places to the east. And you can just see, I mean, white's guys are all going in that direction. Black certainly doesn't need to resign right away. A move like f6 or f5 will perhaps give him some more resources, but still, black is in some trouble. And just to note that this bishop on b6 still really is out of place. So although it's got a nice open diagonal, with respect to helping defend the king side, it isn't doing very much. And because it has no help in its along the diagonal, the fact that it points at f2 really doesn't prove so meaningful. Alright, so for this reason I think black rejected a repeat performance, and in the game played the move knight to b4. So here's a new move, but as it turns out, Martinez had done a pretty fair amount of work on this, to put it mildly. Alright, so after knight to b4, well, the point of knight to b4, first of all, is that it stops knight to d5. So that's the basic idea. And it also attempts to exchange some pieces, which, generally speaking, will favor black. A third point is that perhaps at some moment, black could even consider c6 and d5, which allows the bishop to drop back into play via c7, though on the other hand, the downside is that it gives up the e5 square. So that may not really be feasible for some time, but it's at least a possibility. The main point, though, is to prevent knight to d5 after bishop to g5, queen d8, and it does so with tempo. Alright, so white played queen to d2, and here black has a choice. So exchanging on a4 is perhaps the best move. So I think black can maybe maintain a tenable position here, though he's still under some serious pressure. White's best is to play bishop to g5. No need to recapture on a4 immediately. We can make a useful move here. Queen c8, and queen d7 is also a possibility too. All right, bishop takes f6, and now a very amusing sequence. So this is not easy to find. All right, so naturally black doesn't want to play g takes f6 if he can avoid it. So bishop to c2 is a very logical move, enabling black to meet queen to g5 with the move bishop to g6. So very logical, and the response is very amusing. Rook to a4. So beautiful move. And the point, of course, is that it threatens the knight on b4. And naturally, black can't take on a4 because of queen to g5, g6, queen to h6, followed by queen to g7 mate. Alright, however, black does have defensive possibilities. One of them is not c5. So c5 is also a poor move. White sacrifices the exchange for the moment, but you can see that the threats are really accumulating here. Knight to e7, of course, is threatened, and also rook to c1, getting rid of the bishop, so that way queen to g5 will be a decisive threat. So black probably needs to play rook to b7, and white can regain the material and enjoy probably a winning position here. So simply a pawn up with a better position, and again, black's bishop on b6 is a rather poor piece. Okay, so after rook to a4, going back here, it seems that black's only viable defensive move is g takes f6. Rook takes b4, and then bishop to g6. All the same, while material is even and black's not about to get mated, it's clear that white has a very comfortable advantage in this position. So his minor pieces are better than black's. Black has the bishop pair, but white can eliminate either or perhaps both bishops pretty much at will. Black's kingside pawn structure is poor. So white's better here, but again, black can survive. So black made a very natural move here, queen to c8. And while it's very natural, it may be that this is just about the losing move, which is remarkable. But we'll see, in fact, what white's resources are. So white plays bishop to g5. Of course, he's been intending to do this for quite some time. Black plays knight f to d5, eliminating the attack. Bishop to b3, so he preserves the bishop and gangs up on the knight on d5. Black plays queen to b7, protecting it, and also connecting his rook, so they can now compete for the e-file. And here, white makes, or begins, a really remarkable sequence of moves. So, for those of you who haven't seen this game, this is maybe a good time not just to stop the recording, but to set this position up on your own chessboards and spend a lot of time trying to work things out, because it's very deep. Some parts of it are less deep, but to really work this all the way through is very impressive. Is a very impressive analytical achievement. Now, of course, it's easier with the computer, but even so, better if you do it on your own. So let me encourage you to do that. To at least spend some time trying to work through the lines here. All right. Well, now I'm going to show it to you. So hopefully you've stopped it. This is your last chance. The move played by Martinez is bishop to h6, and of course this is just the beginning. And there's much more to be worked through here. All right. Well, let's first of all note the idea. So the basic idea, if white got to make a second move in a row, the point is very simple. He wants to play queen to g5, which not only threatens mate, but triples up the attack on d5. Though in fact he doesn't even need to win it. He can just play queen g5 after g6, knight takes, bishop takes. And even if black could play queen takes d5, white could ignore the queen and play queen to f6. All right, so that's the even bigger threat. Okay, so what can black do about this? Well, the most obvious move is just to take the bishop. Okay, well, white plays queen takes h6, and now knight to g5 is not a threat. All right, if knight to g5, black will just play bishop to f5, no big deal. And notice that the knight on b4 prevents bishop to c2. So it at least initially seems like maybe black has everything covered. But this is not the case. All right, white's threat here is simply to take on d5 and then play queen to g5 check, and then play bishop takes d5, in which case white would regain the piece, have an extra pawn, and of course a very serious attack as well. So black needs to do something about this basic threat of knight takes d5, and there are a couple of obvious ways to respond. One is to simply take white's knight, the other is to protect his own. So let's take a look at knight c3 first, bc, and now the knight has to move, of course. And neither knight move is really all that great. So knight to c6. Then white does a neat little switchback. So bishop to c2, threatening to mate on h7 or on h8 if the rook moves. And after f5, bishop to b3 check, king h8 and knight to g5, and white forces mate. Okay, so that's simple and compelling. If black plays knight to d3 instead, then another nifty little bit of maneuvering here. Queen g5, queen f6, and rook e7. So white couldn't do this when the knight retreated to c6, but now that it's not there, he can do this. Alright, so the threat is bishop takes f7 check, and after rook takes f7, queen takes f7 check, and then queen g7 or queen h7 mate. And if black defends with bishop to e8, then rook e8, rook b d8, knight g5, again threatening bishop f7, followed by queen f7 and queen h7. So let's say c5, uncovering this defense, and then queen to h6, again forcing mate. Well, maybe not. Maybe black can play queen to e4. So that'll avoid the mate, but at a catastrophic cost in lost material. Alright, so going back here after queen takes h6, we see that knight takes c3 won't do the job. Well, how about c6? So we simply keep both knights in place as long as we can, and also we're uncovering this second rank. So we saw a line where that proved useful. Maybe it'll come in useful here too. Okay, so here white has a couple of possibilities. I'll just look at the main one here, and the one that I think is best. So knight takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop d5, cd, rook to e7. And the threat here is to play knight to g5 because bishop f5 would allow rook takes the queen on b7. So again, black has a choice. If he tries queen c6 to free himself of the pin, then this neat little maneuver is winning. Okay, the point is to play rook f7, and if rook a8, which is double. If bishop to e8, then queen f5, and mate on h7 can't be prevented. If bishop takes d4, we take, and while we can look at more of this line, and we'll quickly go through it, already if white has regained the piece and is attacking essentially for free, then black has no chance, and that's what we'll see here. So h6, and here in fact white can return the piece back again, and white wins. And black has to throw material in the way. He plays bishop to g4, then f4 is crushing, threatening rook takes g4 or queen takes g4. And if rook f4, then queen g5 check, followed by queen takes the rook. Alright, and if rook to g4, well, we've just we're up the exchange with an ongoing attack. So going back here, queen c6 didn't work. So the last try is bishop takes d4. And here, white can gain a clear advantage in a couple of ways. Simplest, maybe knight takes d4. And we just look at a position like this. And black is up a pawn, but his pawns are horrible. His king is in big trouble. Rook takes d7 is threatened. Rook 7 to e3 is another idea. Or, yeah, rook 7 to e3 to g3 is another idea. So this is really just a hopeless position for black, I think, in the long run. So all the way back to bishop to h6. Let me cut the debris out here. We see that black cannot take the bishop. And we also know that queen to g5 is a big threat. So the other move, and the move that Zilberstein played, is f6. Now, this does open the diagonal here, and white can exploit this with rook to e7. Now, again, g takes h6, is just suicide, and it doesn't even win a piece. I mean, if nothing else, white could play rook takes d7. So this is all just big fun for white. So queen h6 is probably possible. Rook f7, takes, and I can't imagine that this isn't winning for white. But again, even rook takes d7 earlier is terrific too. So after rook to e7, black needs to do something else, and that's rook f7. And here it looks as if black is basically okay. White made the exchange of rooks, and it's not immediately apparent what exactly white has. He can't triple up on the knight on d5. His knight on f3 has no leaping squares, and no squares to launch to. I mean, e5 and g5 are covered, while h4 doesn't seem to do anything at all. He can play rook to e1, but okay, there's no entry point now, it seems. So it looks as if, while bishop to h6 and rook e7 was very exciting and flashy, it looks like it really just kind of dead-ended. So again, let me encourage you to try to figure out what white to move should play here, if you haven't, of course, already worked all of this out from earlier. Well, here's what he did. He played rook to e1, and as far as I could tell, white now has a winning position. Though, again, it's far from apparent why exactly this would be. Alright, well, one thing is that there is a threat to at least win a pawn here. Alright, now winning a pawn isn't that exciting, but still, it's a pawn's a pawn. And here's the basic idea. So let's say black plays king to f8 to get out of this pin on the diagonal. Then white can take on d5, take on g7, take on d5 again, and then play rook to e7 and take on d7. And it's not just that white has an extra pawn, of course, but that black's king is still quite exposed, and so white should win here pretty easily. Okay, so going back to the position after rook to e1, we now see, okay, there's at least one threat in the position. But still, it doesn't really seem like it should be that bad. All right, well, let's try a different defense for black, c6. So now the knight on d5 is even more secure, and just as importantly, or more importantly really, the bishop on d7 is now protected by the queen, so the same combination isn't going to work. All right, so knight to d5 takes and takes again, and now white has a couple of tries. So one gives him some advantage, but not enough, while the other seems to continue the brilliancy and to win. Okay, so bishop g7 looks very nice, and I think white maintains an advantage here. So he doesn't win the bishop, but with black's king looking rather nude over there on the king side, with all of his pieces on the queen side not really helping, it's troublesome. But it looks as if he can just kind of slowly but surely run off to the queen side. White grabs pawns, and black gets his king to enjoy some degree of safety. So here we have a funny position where white has 5 pawns for a piece, but we should never underestimate the bishop here. And also white's b pawn is a bit weak. His king could be a little bit endangered in some cases. So it's not really clear how serious white's advantage is in this position. So let's go back to this position here. And instead of bishop takes g7, the best move would appear to be knight to g5 check. So another fantastic move here. And while black has many defensive responses, many possibilities here, can move the king to f8, g8, g6, or take the knight, all seem to fail. Alright, so let's start with king to g8. So let's put our king as out of the way as we can, and black is perhaps thinking that with two of white's pieces en pris, in fact the bishop is just trapped on h6, that he should have some reasonable defensive resources. But this doesn't work. Rook to e7, threatening rook takes g7, so black takes it, and now queen to d3, threatening queen takes h7 with mate next move, so f5, knight e6, with a new mating idea of queen to g3 and queen to g7, bishop to e8. Okay, this stops the mate, but you may have noticed that the queen is now unprotected. And in this position, as if black doesn't have enough problems, the mating threats continue. So he's threatening queen to f8 mate, and if something like rook to f7, then queen to b8 is going to force mate as well. So this position is completely hopeless for black, and that means that after knight to g5 check, king to g8 is no good. All right, let's consider king to f8. Well, now white plays knight takes h7 check, and then bishop takes g7. So utterly unconcerned about the welfare of his minor pieces. It's all about ripping apart the black king's protection. So black should in fact play bishop to c6, once again with this idea of uncovering the second rank for defensive purposes. But he's too late for serious defense. Knight f6, queen g5, and now knight to g4 is a very nice move that eliminates all resistance. And the point is that white now threatens knight h6 check, king f8, queen to g8 mate. And there isn't any good defense to this. And again, this shouldn't be surprising, as black's king has absolutely no protection here, and three very big pieces that are all functioning beautifully together are hot on its trail. Alright, so king to f8 was no good. Alright, how about king to g6? Well, so here's another try. In this case, white plays rook to e7, and again, black is faced with only poor options. If he takes the knight, it's mate in one. If he takes the bishop with the king, then knight e6, and wherever the king goes, gets tracked down and mated. The other option is g takes h6, and again, this might look okay at first, but after the move knight to f7, black has no good response to the new mating threats that start with the move queen takes h6. So queen h6, king f5, queen h5, king f4, g3 would be one such mating continuation. Alright, well, that I think covers all of the possible defenses after knight to g5 check. Oh, maybe we didn't discuss f takes g5. Yeah, so f takes g5. Queen takes g5, bishop to d4, rook e7 check, and then bishop takes g7 is how you dust that one off. Okay, so what we've done now is after rook to e1, we've refuted king to f8. Remember, this just loses the pawn. White takes twice on d5, takes on g7 and plays rook to e7 check. And c6 loses to the double capture on d5, followed by knight to g5 check. Well, there's one more move, and this is perhaps the most obvious move, and it's the move that Zilberstein played, rook to e8. And once again, it's far from obvious what white has. So he traded the rooks, swapped off the knights, and once again, let me encourage you or dare you to try to figure out what white does. Because, again, the material is getting relatively limited. There aren't any obvious threats. The bishop on h6 is under attack. And it seems as if black is basically going to be okay here. So all of this, of course, was prepared in advance. At least I assume it was prepared in advance by Martinez. So it'd be nice to know where exactly his preparation ended. At any rate, white still has a very, very strong move here. And really without this, the whole plan of attack that Martinez devised would simply have been a flash in the pan, but nothing substantial. Okay, well, the move, in fact, is indeed substantial and flashy. Knight to g5 check. So we've seen this idea already. It's remarkable, though, that even with the limited material, that it's still so powerful. All right, so the basic initial tactical justification is that after f takes g5, queen g5, white not only threatens to take on g7, but more importantly, threatens bishop takes d5 check, winning the queen. Okay, so what does black do? Well, one big problem is that if he plays c6, then queen g7 doesn't lead to mate, but it skewers the queen and the king and the queen. So king to e6 is the other try. Well, okay. I mean, you could play bishop to c6 as well, and then queen to g7 check is going to lead to a decisive attack. So king to e6, queen to g4 check. This way he takes the pawn on g7 with check. If king to f7, queen f5 regains the piece, and probably wins the queen as well. Yeah, because if king to g8, bishop takes d5. And if king goes to e7, then bishop takes d5, and if the queen preserves her life, let's say queen a6, bishop g5 is mate. Alright, so queen to g4 check, let's say king to e7, queen g7, bishop g5, and finally queen g5, queen g8 with a double attack. So hitting this bishop and hitting the knight. So white regains the material, will be 2 pawns ahead. Well, regains the piece, regains the material and then some. And black's king is still not entirely pleased with its life. Alright, so after knight to g5 check, then we see that f takes g5 doesn't pan out. So Zilberstein tried king to f8. And here, knight takes h7 probably doesn't work after king to g8. So once again, we have to figure out what the big plan is. What's white's tactical justification for all this? Because now, if he doesn't have anything, again, he's sort of self-stalemated his bishop. Well, the answer is bishop takes g7 check. So final beautiful blow here in the game. If king takes g7 now, knight to e6 check, and black, again, has only bad options. The basic problem for him here, and it's just remarkable how many tactical resources white has, is that if he plays king to f7, then white has this fork with knight to d8 check. So that's clearly decisive. Alright, so let's look at the other retreats here that don't walk into that. So if king to g6, well, now there's a different fork here. You can play bishop takes d5, followed by knight to f4, or even better, you can prepare it with a couple of moves first. Okay, bishop to h5, g4 with a mating attack, or if king to g6, bishop takes d5 is again winning because queen takes d5, knight f4. Or from a computer perspective, even better than bishop takes d5 is to give mate. Well, it's better from a human perspective too, but typically a human is going to see the win of the queen and be done with it. But there's the mating attack. Okay, so after knight to e6 check, we've just refuted king to g6 on account of bishop takes d5, or more intricate ways of pursuing things, but bishop takes d5 is a basic winning idea. We saw, of course, king f7 walks in and knight to d8, and that leaves king to g8. And this one simply loses to queen h6, again with the dual mate threat, not just queen to g7, but queen to f8 as well. And there's no way for black to avoid the mate except with king to f7, but then, once again, we have knight to d8, which wins the queen. Alright, so after bishop takes g7 check, Zilberstein realized he couldn't capture the bishop safely and played king to g8. But now, after bishop takes f6, Martinez is simply up 2 pawns, and the attack continues, and the glamour is finished. Actually, there's a nice last move too, but basically it's a straightforward winning position at this point. c6, protecting the knight finally, and again clearing the second rank. Queen e2, queen d7, covering e6 and e8. Queen e4, doubling up on that poor knight again. And black really can't do anything about this because, well, let's just look at the options. How can we defend this knight a second time? If you bring the queen to b7, you hang the bishop on e8, so that's no good. If you play the queen to f7, of course, you just hang the queen. If you play bishop to f7, then queen takes f7 check is crushing, and in fact just leads to a quick mate. So queen h7, king f8, queen g7, king e8, queen h8, and then queen takes g8 as mate. So there isn't any way to defend the knight a second time. It doesn't lose even worse. So Zilberstein gave up a third pawn. And, okay, now it's just a mopping up operation. Martinez played knight to e6 check. And if black played king to g8, then among other things, white can win a fourth pawn, knight to c5 check, attacking the queen, so queen f7, and then queen takes d6. So instead of this, Zilberstein played king to e8, and here, see if you can figure out the last move of the game. So this move forced resignation from black. Okay, the move is knight c5, and Zilberstein resigned here. The threat, of course, is to capture the queen, and the basic point is that, well, the first point is that if d takes c5, queen to g8 is mate. If black tries to counterattack with bishop to f7, then simply queen to e4 check, and the black queen is lost. And finally, if queen to f7, covering the check to g8, blocking the path there, well, then white goes the other way, queen to a8 check, bishop d8, and queen takes d8 mate. So all said, a very good reason for black to resign after the move knight to c5. So this was a fantastic game by Martinez. As far as I'm concerned, clearly the highest quality game of the season. Again, I'm sure that some of the other judges rated it a little bit less highly than I did on account of a lot of it being theoretical preparation. I'm inclined to think that that's not really such a mark against it. So the contest wasn't for the game of the year with the most moves invented over the board, but just for the game of the year. And so if judges rejected it for the reason that it was preparation, or largely preparation, I think that's a mistake. By way of analogy, or not analogy, but by way of some comparisons historically, there's the famous game that Pillsbury lost to Lasker in 1896, and he came up with an improvement and won against Lasker in 1904 with his improvement. And this game is famous, and so he's been praised. The game was praised at the time, and for generations afterward, both as Pillsbury's swan song, but as a bit of brilliant preparation. Or think too of the 1985 game, I believe, between Karpov and Kasparov. So the D5 gambit in the Sicilian, and a lot of that game was preparation. So I mean, it was preparation through the point where Kasparov achieved this remarkable bind with the black pieces. So he was down a pawn, never tried to recover it, but practically stalemated all of white's pieces. All right, well, that was a preparation idea too, but that was in fact part of the brilliance of the game. So my inclination is to think that this is a fantastic achievement, and it's not as if Zilberstein couldn't have prepared for it too. I mean, in fact, Martinez anticipated Zilberstein's improvement, his novelty, and just went deeper. So I think it's a fantastic game. It's a game of theoretical significance. It was very well played by both sides. I mean, Zilberstein made no obvious errors, and White's play just was absolutely terrific. So I hope you enjoyed the game, and I hope you also learned something, especially if you play either side of this variation. So it's definitely a game you should take into account when preparing for future events. So thanks a lot, everyone, and I'll see you next week with the second place finishing game in the contest. So take care, and goodbye.